Good afternoon, and to some of you, maybe good morning or good evening. Thank you for participating today. Basic rules, please the sound off, but we're happy to make it a very interactive session, so please also make use of the chat. And please note that this webinar will be recorded. It will be our third webinar of a series of webinars focusing on the challenges in mobility around the world. My name is Mieke Masselink, and I'm a community manager of the Smart Mobility Embassy, where we bring people, knowledge, and expertise from different organizations and countries together. And by having this international community, we tackle challenges from different perspectives, encouraging creative approaches and solutions. As we all know, the coronavirus has put us into a world lockdown. However, the positive effect is that we can digitally connect with almost the entire world. We still have the issue of different time zones. Today, we will be addressing the challenges around mobility hubs. It's a very hot topic we hear everybody talking about. Hubs aim to offer improved transportation experience for both the travelers, but also for cities and private operators. But there are still some challenges, like where do you position the mobility hubs? How is the supply matching the local demand? How do municipalities guarantee that mobility is offered in the longer term by private parties? And we see still a lot of trials fail commercially, so developing a sustainable business model seems to be quite a challenge as well. Today we're talking to several experts that are helping us to find answers on how to implement mobility hubs successfully. With us today here is my colleague Tom van Dam, Klaas-Jan Graven, who is working for the city of Nijmegen, Nick Juffermans from Goudappel, Delia, who works for EIT Mobility, Sander Oudbier from the AMS Institute, who is leading the Mobility Hubs project within the EIT. Tom, we're going to start with you. Please take us along. What do you see happening in the Netherlands when it comes to the implementation of mobility hubs?
Yeah, thank you, Mieke. We see in the Netherlands there is a societal issue currently is the lack of space, and due to urbanization, there's also a short of housing, and more housing in cities will increase movement as well. So if you do not change our approach, we cannot move at all anymore. So on the other side, we see a more service-based economy, Netflix, Spotify, music and movies, but also in mobility. Mobility as a service offers opportunities to improve accessibility and livability in cities. And now, because of autonomous driving isn't go-to-market yet, all the modalities who are offered as a service need to be parked somewhere strategically. A mobility hub. So a mobility hub is a high-end physical location which offers a variety of sustainable and active mobilities, and it's also combined with a pleasant accommodation. So travelers can have a modality of their choice and can easily transfer to other modalities. An hub is also a pleasant and safe, recognizable area where the people can stay and transfer to different modalities. But it's also pleasant for local residents. So it has to be located somewhere in the city. So there are also people living nearby. So it has to be pleasant for them as well. Mobility hubs are coming slowly but surely. In the northern of the Netherlands, the provinces Groningen and Drenthe already deployed 50 mobility hubs, which primarily offer services like bicycle storages, charging infrastructure, Wi-Fi, and even water taps. Other players, more private parties like Haley are active in 7 cities right now in the Netherlands, and they are offering multiple modalities to citizens.
Well, thank you, Tom. And well, you're working for Connect. You probably could also share a bit more about how public and private parties work together on this.
Yeah. Mobility is a demand-supply market. On the other hand, municipalities do have to offer transportation possibilities for their citizens. So nowadays it's provided within the public transport, and the current collaboration is mostly on allowance. So a mobility hub is primarily located in public space, and they need permits to execute their businesses. However, mobility hubs also can add services to the public transport. For instance, first and last mile is a solution mobility hubs can offer. And when the effect is to reduce the usage of the private vehicles and an increase of public transport, I think the collaboration should be more extensive than it is already.
All right. Thank you. What do you hear? What do you hope to hear from the other speakers today?
Yeah, I hope to hear this session what roles governments and private parties see for themselves in upscaling this development, and I'm also interested in the issues that will be addressed that's slowing down the implementation, so we can try to tackle them together.
All right, thank you, Tom. Well, let's start with the municipality, moving to Klaas-Jan. Thank you for participating today.
You're welcome.
Do you recognize the challenges as Tom is addressing? Why?
Yeah, absolutely. We see a lot of demand for extra housing in our municipality and in our region of Arnhem and Nijmegen. We have to build 60,000 extra houses in the next years, and but the amount of space is limited. We have a really green surroundings, and that's unique for our region, and so we want to keep that. So the amount of space is limited, but more habitants means more traffic. So and we already have jammed roads. So to keep our cities accessible and livable and attractive, yeah, we have to reduce the dominance of the car and in the public space, and stimulate active mobility even more than we do now. So I think mobility hubs are a really important part of the solution, but we are struggling to have it implemented and to do it the right way, to have it a sustainable implementation.
And how would you describe your role as a municipality? As you mentioned, you are decreasing the parking options, but does the municipality also need to take the responsibility to provide alternative ways to move from A to B?
Yeah.
What's your role as a municipality there?
Yes, it's always a play between the municipality and the private sector, of course. But I think we have to develop a real balanced policy that takes into account all interests, so like the accessibility of the city and the economic concentrations within it, the sustainability and environment, the livability and attractiveness of the city, and social aspects and the health of the inhabitants. So that's very important to have a balanced policy for that. And I think we have to create the right conditions to have a sustainable mobility system. So I think getting the infrastructure right for your active mobility, and for public transport, and of course the public space for shared mobility. That could be hubs, but sometimes it will not be hubs because the private sector says, well, a free floating system is sometimes more attractive, but that's a discussion. But also setting the right conditions so the private sector can develop the solutions. And I think setting the preconditions like the lower parking norms with new developing areas and enforcement of your rules. So I think those are some of the responsibilities for the municipality. But I think it's really going back and forth with the private sector to come with the best solutions. I think if the public sector tries to develop it all, it will be a disaster because we are too, well, not a disaster, but we don't know what the customers want. So we know what we want as a city for with all those interests. But I think we must use the knowledge of the private sector at its best.
All right. And if private parties want to get number one, a location in your city, you already mentioned the preconditions you might give for these private parties to set up a mobility hub there. Are you able to give these preconditions? Is it allowed even? Give that?
Yeah, of course. The A locations are very expensive and sparse, so you really have to know where you want them. But of course, you can create the space by reducing the amount of parking spaces. That could be one, but I think it's important to if you do that, that you have conditions like quality, the durance of the vehicles, the maintenance, how quickly the vehicles are repaired, etc. But also the quantity. We say that we want a maximum amount of providers, but also a maximum amount of vehicles, and we demand that the providers they give us data to prove if they have to expand their amount of vehicles. If they can prove that that all their vehicles are used very frequently and they really need to get more, they can get more. But it's not the idea that they just put all their vehicles in the city and they are never used. So, and the third condition is, like I said, the data. So the data we get as a municipality for our policy, but also the data for the mass platforms, so they can integrate those services in the mass platform.
All right. Well, thank you, Klaas-Jan. What do you hope to hear from Nick, Sander, and Delia today?
Yeah, I think how we can work together and how to implement hubs in the cities, but also more rural areas. We in the region of Arnhem and Nijmegen we implemented 13 e-hubs. We call them. Those are hubs with electric shared vehicles, and so right now we do that with the private sector and universities, and we look at the branding and the campaigns and etc. So in a year it must result in a blueprint how to implement those in other cities, but also rural areas. And what you see is that mobility providers, they are interested to provide the services in cities, but also the smaller municipalities around the central cities, they need those services, especially because public transport is also reduced in quality and quantity, also because of COVID, for example. So, and that's a big challenge because there is not a bulk of demand. So I'm curious what the providers and other parties think about that.
All right, thank you. Let's hope they're able to give you some answers to that. I think Nick is not in the call yet. So Sander and Delia, if it's okay with you, we'll go straight to you.
Sure.
Yep.
You both work for the EIT Mobility. Delia, I'm curious to look on a European scale. What trends do you see in Europe when it comes to mobility, and what really stands out?
Yes. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Mika, for inviting me here. And I'm really happy to have Sander next to me, because you will see it's a very good combination from me being here from the EIT urban mobility perspective, and Sander running a project that we started this year, Smart Hub. So he will be able to give you a little bit of more practical examples from his own experience, although the project just started in January. So just to mention that the European Institute of Innovation and Technology, we are acting now under the umbrella of the EIT. So we are the last or the new kid on the block in this European organization, as focusing on the urban mobility. And since January 2019, we are fully operation, and in 2020 we had the first batch of projects approved. So from our perspective, we are actually in the core of our existence, if I can say that. The improvement and the livability of urban places, of our places where we live, of our cities. It's actually the core business, if I would be allowed to say so. And in our community, which is composed by different kind of stakeholders, having the cities in the very heart of our organization, we also have the academy, universities and research organizations, and we have the industry. So all these stakeholders are giving hand in hand to answer actually the challenges the cities are facing. And to answer and to go back to your first question, what kind of trends do we see at EIT Urban Mobility when we have about hubs? Is that on the one hand side, we do focus, or the trends are focusing on modernization, if I can say so, of the existing hubs, because hubs do exist from decades. If you think that around the central stations, we have the buses, and we have the taxis, and we have the huge parking places for the bicycles, at least in the Dutch context, these are also hubs. But to these hubs, there is a huge need to add new functions. And these functions will give that added value of such places, the functions of meeting each other. Because even now, if you think in the COVID context, I don't really need to travel to my office to meet my colleagues or to meet a client. I will probably stop to Utrecht and grab a cup of coffee, eat something nice, meet my client, have a discussion, maybe to pick up my parcel, and then I go back home. So these new functions to be added to the existing hubs, we see it as a need coming from our community. From September up to March this year, September last year up to March, we conducted a very intensive consultation process with our stakeholders, and we were asking them, where do you want to focus? Where do you want us to focus in the coming years? and transport hubs was one of the answers provided by them. So this is one of the trends. And the second one that we have noticed coming from all these three kinds of stakeholders that I mentioned are the new hubs, the smaller hubs, the more flexible hubs in the suburbs of the city, because they have this function, they might have this function to cover the last mile coverage. And this is also needed to free up, let's say, the city centers. You don't need to travel to the city center for some of the functions. If you think about all this booming e-commerce, why should I go to the central station or to the center? It can be provided to me in the nearby of my house. So these are two trends that we have noticed since September, when we intensively communicated with our partners in setting up the strategy actually for the coming 3 years. I hope I answered a bit your question.
Yeah, what if you look at the additional functions for the hubs? What are the major bottlenecks to achieve that? Why is it not there yet? Is it regulation? Is it technology? Is it behavioral change?
Honestly, I think it's a bit of everything that you mentioned, and I'm saying that based on what we've learned from our community. Definitely, it's something that, in terms of cooperation between public and private, there is a lot to do there. I don't know how we are doing and experimenting a lot, and I hope there will be these magic formulas that soon will work very well. But on the side of regulations, legal aspects, public procurement, if I put as a municipality, I bring in the parking place, what you bring as a mobility service provider, and how can we start and make a business model actually for me as a private entity. So this is one of the aspects, not to speak about the behavior change, which has an enormous impact on our street. It's very comfortable to step in on your car on a rainy day. Although in the Netherlands, it rains not that much as everyone would expect. But these are things to definitely to take into account, how to convince people that it's much healthier. Not only for you as a person thinking of your body and of your mental health, but also for the environment. So behavior change is definitely one of the issues that we all as public or private entities should put a lot of effort in convincing our citizens to use it less, and what's the impact. And that's why we put a lot of effort in creating this or giving the new functions of the hubs, because they have the function of freeing up our public space, our urban space, and we can put a terrace on a place where it was yesterday a car, or we can create new bicycle lines, and we are getting healthier, and we educate in this way our kids that they, over 5 years, I really hope that my kid is now 13, he won't want to have a car, to buy a car, or even not to think about a driving license.
Thank you, Delia. Keeping the human factor still part of the discussion somewhere. Mm-hmm. You're leading the Smart Hubs project within Europe, so in several cities. How do you organize sort of common sense between all the different hubs? So I know how a hub works here in Amsterdam, but once I go to Paris on holiday, is it going to work completely different? How does that look like?
That's a very good question, and also something that it's not entirely tackled in this project that we're running right now, because we're really focusing on what is the value proposition, the way procurement works, and how does the public-private partnership work. But this is also complementary to the UMOS project, for example, which is also an EIT urban mobility project, which is focusing on creating one backbone for integrating hubs and shared mobility. In this project, we're mainly focusing on these issues that were already mentioned before. So how do you actually get a hub in place? How do you dedicate space to hubs? These issues, and like Klaus-Jan also said, the relationship of vehicles, how do you make sure you have enough vehicles? How do you show that to the city as well? An interesting thing was one of our partners, Haley, for example. They had a very funny case. Once it started actually freezing in the Netherlands, their customers who actually sold their car to be able to use their shared services, they were relying on Haley to provide them with mobility options. And once it started freezing, they got a lot of new customers actually getting the bikes and getting the cargo bikes, the electric bikes, to go to the canals and to be able to go ice skating. But that meant that all of the new customers actually took the bikes that were usually relied upon by their existing customers, who were very unhappy that they got rid of their own personal private vehicle and were not able to get to the canals to go ice skating anymore because they couldn't reserve last minute a spot for a bike. So that means that it's also behavioral change, that you need to make sure that there's enough availability, because otherwise people won't want to get rid of their own private personal car that you can so easily get into and just go to the canals and park it somewhere, if you're lucky, of course, in Amsterdam. But yeah, these sort of things, it's not just about efficiently using these vehicles and making sure they're used all of the time, but it's also about making sure there's enough circulating. So these sort of relationships, they're coming forward in all of our projects, and we have 6 cities with hubs. And it's just amazing to compare the data from these hubs. Each hub is different. I saw that Delia put in the chat improved connections between the rural and urban areas. In Eindhoven, for example, one of the hubs is on the southern part of the city at a PNR location, which will serve travelers coming into the city to improve connectability to the city center as well. So you'll be able to park your car there. You'll be able to take a cargo bike or an electric bike or just a regular bike from that hub and go into the city center, which makes sure that you don't have to park your car into the city center anymore, but also the other way around. There can be electric cars there as well, so that if you want to travel outside to the rural region, you can just take an electric car from that PNR location. So these sorts of hubs are very interesting to look into. So not entirely answering your question into how do we make it a seamless experience, but I think that's handled in different projects and not entirely in this one, but definitely a challenge. Yeah.
Well, you already
so maybe,
mentioned also,
Mika, when we will deal with intermodality, then we can deal also with your question, and then we can have some other projects from our community working hard on, for example, the mass concept in Europe.
Well, Sander, you already mentioned the accessibility when it comes to rural areas, but how do you also take into account the accessibility of, for example, disabled people or people with a lower income? How can you guarantee that they will be able to also have the mobility options?
It's a good question indeed. I know I've just got the document from Amsterdam, the hub future basically laid out. So what are they planning to do in terms of hubs and inclusiveness and making sure that it's available for disabled people, with people who are not so technological, for example. That's also very important. So our private partners, they are very much focused on this as well, because they want, of course, to reach as many customers as possible. So we work a lot with Haley. I'm not entirely sure how they are currently doing this, as it's not one of the research questions, but I know that Amsterdam is very much looking into making sure that even people with lower incomes are able to afford this and don't have to rely on other sources of transport, because it's important that everybody in Amsterdam as well is able to just travel within the city as well. And it's one of the main points for their hub future. So it's definitely something that's taken into account, but there's no straight answer, I think, right now, how you can make sure people actually are able to take the bikes, for example, the cargo bikes, or it also depends a bit, of course, on the disability, but perhaps there's certain vehicles you can accommodate them with, but it's not something we unfortunately can answer in the coming year, because we're still very much in the starting phases of the project. This year is really to kickstart the hubs, to make sure the hubs get started, and then next year we want to start exploiting different experiences. Yeah.
Well, I'm glad to hear that there's already a lot of research ongoing, but I'm also curious, what if you would have twice as much time? What extra research, pilots or tests would you immediately start with? What's missing according to you?
I think from our side, we are very much as AMS Institute investigating into behavioral aspects. So we really want to know what drives people to take a certain mode of transport, what makes them move, and why would you want to keep your second car, or why do you want to get rid of it? So how do you influence those people? I think that's for us the key concept, to understand that. That will be so interesting. And right now, I think combining private and public is already a big enough challenge to make sure that procurement goes smoothly, that the hubs are installed, that we're investigating different business models, as Delia said, for example, adding postal collection points as well. But yeah, to be able to dive into that individual motivation of people that are actually living in the city and want to get somewhere, and how do you influence them to basically get, for example, to the Autoluw, which is basically not having cars in the city center anymore, to be able to make them go to that new future. That's for us that's very inspiring.
All right. Well, my last question for both you, Sander, and Delia is, what happens, or what do you expect when the European funding, public funding, will end? What will happen? Who will become the owner of what?
What we expect is definitely that, so now we are investing a lot in these questions, in research, in looking for and bringing people together, bringing organizations together, see what they need, and let them actually develop what they need, and experiment. This is something that we are investing in now. And with the scope of definitely discovering this future successful business model, because we can invest, but to a certain extent and for a certain period, but then it's up to the market to take it over.
Yeah, exactly.
So I really hope, we will invest this year, and definitely there are some other programs from the EU investing in this topic, because it's a hot topic. Also, if you take a look into the mobility strategy from the EU, but then the market needs to develop further.
Yeah, exactly. And I think projects such as these, they generate the knowledge as well for the commercial parties to be able to get a successful business model that you can apply relatively certain to a certain area. We're also working on the decision support tool, which basically helps urban planners and commercial parties as well to see what kind of area would be suitable for a certain type of hub. And the knowledge generated in this project is also, for example, Haley in the Netherlands, and Frog in Portugal, and Skoda Auto in Poland. They use this as well to improve their business model, and to be able to have a more successful hub that won't be so trial and error based, but based upon actual research results. And we hope that they are able to use that knowledge and improve their proposition, so that they can just keep spreading and make sure that it becomes a more consistent thing in the landscape of our cities.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Sander and Delia. I hope Nick from Goudapple in the meantime joined our call.
Yes, I did, Miko.
Thank you, Nick.
My apologies.
No problem.
I was running a bit late, but I'm
You're
glad
here.
Yeah, I'm here, and we have only 10 minutes, so...
We talked about already about how hubs can be a great solution to improve the livability in cities, but I'm also curious to hear about another view. What are hubs not a solution for? So are there any myths that exist according to mobility hubs?
Yes, I think so. The first time I came across the concept of a mobility hub was in Utrecht, and the idea was developed from the fact that we need to build. We have a shortage of affordable housing in the Netherlands, which is a huge challenge for us, and we're talking about thousands and thousands of houses that we need to build. The problem is that we also want to keep the green fields that we have in the Netherlands. We want to keep them green, so we need to build them within the cities, preferably, or at other places that we already have developed our municipalities. However, this gives us a number of challenges that we need to solve, and one of them is the mobility part. So we cannot anymore within our cities support 2 or even 1 car per household. And how do you provide housing to the inhabitants of the Netherlands, while also providing them the freedom of mobility that we have here? And that's where we saw mobility hubs as a concept rise. I'm also afraid because I can get a map from the Netherlands and I can put hundreds of dots on the Netherlands where people are talking about hubs. And sometimes I think that the solution is becoming the goal itself. So we already talk about hubs and we don't even can answer the question, why do we need a hub over here? So I'd say there need to be 2 things. One, the traditional way of planning, of mobility planning, is not a solution in the area, so we need to think about another strategy. That could be the first one, that you can say, okay, hubs might be a solution. The other one is that we think that the mobility hub itself could be a better solution than the traditional car ownership within an area. And the last one is the more difficult one, because it's very limited to, I think, inner cities. Because if you look at rural areas in the Netherlands, the car dominance will be present there, and the hub and micro mobility and shared cars won't be a better solution over there. So I think you will see hubs at the border between those different types of living spaces. We call them. And so you have a conflict between inner cities where people should walk and bike, and the rest of the Netherlands where people should use their car because it's better for the accessibility. But somewhere there's a conflict and people should change modes, and their hubs might be a solution.
Thanks, Nick. We talked about it before, public-private collaboration. You say all the dots in the Netherlands where these discussions are happening right now. Are you also missing certain people on the table of these discussions? Is it the residents, the real estate parties, maybe even broader, the parcel deliverer, or the beer supplier for now that the terraces are open again in the Netherlands?
Yeah, I was not on the terrace this afternoon. This is not the reason why I was late. Let's clarify that. Oh, I think I want the residents. I want them involved. We use them in a couple of projects. So we interviewed the future residents of a new project on their take on shared mobility, car ownership, etc., and what they want within a mobility hub. So, of course, you need to think about some sort of standardization. So you offer private parties the opportunity to create a business model, because you can imagine that if you create a million different types of hubs, that it will be very difficult to actually create a business model. So you need some form of synergy. But on the other hand, these hubs needs to be demand driven in order for people to change and actually use them. So I think first place you should always talk with the actual users or future users of the mobility hub. And a lot of time it's still planning and design, and the user is not always present at the discussion.
Yeah. You mentioned already your role in Utrecht. You're very much involved in the process of implementing hubs there. What are already the lessons learned that you can share here?
So the first one is the most difficult and also the most difficult and exciting one. If you look at the mobility hubs, you see the more. I heard Delia Son already talk also about this, about the business model and when can private take over. The challenging mobility hubs are the ones that are driven by a a change of mobility strategy for the users. So people should change from car usage to bike, public transport, micro mobility, etc. And in order to make it successful, you should monitor, but also finalize and also reward the change that has taken place. This should be incorporated within the business model for the actual hub party, which is implementing the hub. If you don't have such a system in place, we already have discussions on, okay, perhaps it's just a parking garage with a nice look and feel, but it's nothing more or less, because people can still do their traditional mobility scheme. So if you really want that change, the change should also be incorporated within the business model, and actually the municipalities or perhaps other government agencies should actually monitor, but also build contracts around them in order for the parties to actually make the change happen. And this is, I think, this is the most difficult part, why mobility hubs are not yet fully realized.
I see Sander already nodding. Is that something you see as well?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, like you said, for example, we can place a hub somewhere, but to integrate other parties or other businesses there as well, it's already quite hard to even get a mobility provider there, and to add other parties to provide, for example, added value to customers. So it's more attractive to use it and to be rewarded in terms of ease of use. I think that's something that's definitely hard to be tackled, and a bit of positive reinforcement from municipalities can definitely help there. Yeah.
All right. Well, I'm looking at the time. I would like to thank you, Klaas-Jan, Nick, Sander, Tom, and Delia for sharing your insights and the challenges you're struggling with. Via the Smart Mobility Embassy, we hope to continue having these discussions and aim to work together with you to find solutions for these challenges. I hope it was a fruitful webinar. You're always welcome to reach out if you have any further questions, requests, or interest in collaborating with us. If you have any specific questions for our speakers or interested to continue the discussions, all the speakers will be able to stay another 15 minutes. So you are also very much welcome to stay. For the ones that are leaving now, thank you very much for joining. Have a good day, afternoon or evening, and hopefully we should stay in touch. Thank you.